A pin is not just a tactic for beginners. Pins get played at all levels. And in this video, we're going to actually see grandmasters falling into traps that are possible because of pins. So our first one, we actually have a very strong grandmaster, Hare Krishna, who falls into this pin. He's playing black, and he plays pawn to g5, and white springs the trap. You might see it. The rook captures here, forking the king and the queen, and Hare Krishna, realizing his mistake, actually resigned right now. Because, after the queen captures, the queen and king are lined up on the g-file, and the rook would come over to pin the queen to the king. So we're going to see a combination of tactical ideas getting used together. That one was a fork that attracted the queen to a square for a pin. In this example, black moves up to create a skewer, attacking the bishop. If it moves, the pawn's behind it. The rook moves to protect it, but now a simple sacrifice, and black wins a piece, and white resigned. Now, in this one, we're back to the white side of things, and the black king is on the run, and he runs over to d4, and white uses a pin to set up a skewer. Even though the rook's not guarded, that attracts the queen towards the rook, and now white can play this check and win the queen. Ian Rohan, one of the top-rated grandmasters in the world, was playing in this game against Boris Gelfand. Rohan plays knight to d7, and now he gets to play a pin that also has the support of the back rank threat. And the idea is here he's pinning the knight, the pressure is already coming on the knight, and if black captures the knight at d7, Rohan gets to play queen e8 for a mate in 2. So Gelfand actually resigned right there. He can't even protect this poor knight in any way. In this example, we see Grandmaster Judith Polgar. She brings her queen back, and it looks like a pretty innocent move. It guards the pawn on d7, but it's actually a trap. The pawn pushes, and she sees what's happening on the d-file. Look at this move. This is amazing. Rook to d2. It's putting pressure and pinning this knight all at the same time. And of course, if the white rook captures it, now there's a fork on the back rank, and the queen will take, and that poor knight is pinned again, and it's lost. And she won the game. Here we see that black sees the idea of a pin happening along the d-file. But right now the rook is under attack. So if he moves the rook away, white will have a chance to move the knight, and everything will be safe. So black sacrifices the rook for a bishop, and then wins the knight. So black gave away a rook, but gets a bishop and a knight in return, and black went on to win that game. Here we're going to start talking about a cross pin. And a cross pin happens when there's a pin in 2 different directions. Let me explain. White played rook c7 check, and the rook blocked it. And now that rook is pinned to the king. And the queen comes over, and now that rook is pinned 2 different ways. So it's pinned both to the king and to the queen. So there's no good answer. The rook can't capture the rook because the queen gets captured, and the rook can't move over and protect the queen because then the queen gets captured, and there's a pin along that 7th rank. So that's a cross pin. Now here's an amazing example. Black, first of all, thinks that with this capture, knight takes d5, that he's taking advantage of this pin and discovery along that long diagonal. Well, white has a plan of his own, and white captures the knight, and when the bishop takes back, you're going to be shocked at white's next move. Queen to d2, a cross pin. The queen is pinning the bishop to the queen, and the bishop is pinning black's bishop to the king. And so we see that cross in action. After black captured here, white took check, the pawn blocks, and now a discovered attack coming from the bishop. The knight captures, and so if the pawn takes, obviously, then bishop takes queen. And so black takes with a queen. Now you simply step the queen out of the way for a pin that wins the queen. This is a great example of 2 pins getting used. First, after the queen takes this bait, the bishop comes, and this pawn on g7 is pinned, so he can't capture the bishop. The king moves out of that pin, but unfortunately, even though this bishop on c8 or f8 is guarded by the queen, it's pinned. and white captures at g7 for a checkmate because that bishop is pinned. Now Anand, a great player, is playing black in this game, and after a few clever moves, Anand gets to this position in which his opponent has put the pressure along this d file. So he blocks it, getting this pawn to push, which blocks the bishop from coming out. Then he captures the knight. And here we see an important idea, that this is a relative pin. The knight's not pinned to the king, and so it actually could move if it needed to. So in this position, if the pawn captures the bishop, the knight will simply jump out of the way and attack the white queen at the same time. So you can actually move out of the pin. In the game, when he captured this way, the rook took back, and Anand sidesteps and pins the rook to the queen. And the queen has to come back, because if pawn takes bishop, then the rook can come to d8 and win the white rook that's now pinned on the d7 square. All right, our final example is a very fun one. White has set up a little trap here along the a file. Black takes it, thinking white's simply going to capture back, but instead check, and the king comes here. And you probably don't see any pins on the board, but you can attract the black king into a pin. And that's what white plays here. Rook to h8, check. And now when the king captures the rook at h8, the white queen can capture the h6 pawn for free, and it's mate on the next move, because now that g pawn is pinned. Checkmate. And by the way, if you're wondering what happens if the king comes out, this is even more fun. The queen jumps into g5 check, and after the pawn captures, then pawn to h5 is checkmate. Nothing to do with the pin on that final move, but still a lot of fun. All right, that's it for challenge pins. I'll check you later.